biggest thing to worry about is what kind of impact you're trying to have. The next biggest thing is how you're going to change behavior to get it. Every organization trying to create impact is a behavior change organization, whether they know it or not.
First, we've got to figure out what behavior we want to change. So go and look at your diff and check out the behavior map. Remember, the behavior map is just that list of behaviors, each of which has to happen to lead to impact. Same example for this lesson as last time, the Inyanyeri clean cook stove. Now their behavior map looks like this. Clients have to get a stove, get the fuel for the stove, use the stove exclusively, start it right, ventilate it enough, get it fixed when it breaks, and that all leads to healthier families. In this lesson, we're going to focus a fair bit on the use it exclusively behavior. Kevin's going to teach you a way of thinking about a singular behavior that you want to change, which means you can do this process for every single one in your map, but start with the most important one.
Choose the behavior that seems most fundamental to creating impact. What's most central to your whole methodology for impact? Who exactly has to do what exactly differently? For example, in the whole clean cook stove arena, it's really important that you only use the improved stove. You only get a health benefit from a cook stove if it removes the vast majority, say 90% of the pollutants from the air, or 90% less emissions. And if you use a great stove and then a lousy stove at the same time, it negates all those benefits. So you need a really high quality, high performance stove, and you need to not be using other stoves at the same time. I mean, imagine you were doing a stove before some of this research came out, and you just thought, hey, if they just use this stove most of the time, everything's fine. But then it turns out, you see the data, and that 90% cut in emissions has to happen all the time, every time, for you to get the health benefit. So you just added in the word exclusively. And you may have done so iteratively with some hard lessons in the interim, but either way, you get as specific as you can, as soon as you can. The more specific you define the actor for your situation, the better. If you said families cook on a better stove, that isn't going to give you as nice granular design as mom cooks on the stove or grandma cooks on the stove. It takes some judgment though, because if you pick too narrowly, you could miss important actors and miss important opportunities and create problems for yourself. Every day we seem to know more about how critical micronutrients are in childhood development. And so the big problem in Africa is everybody eats mostly starch. And the other big problem is that there's not, for a lot of people, they don't eat centrally processed flour. And so it's really hard to get micronutrients into kids. And the obvious solution is you need to get local millers to put in the exact right amount of the micronutrient powder. It has to be just right. It has to be an exact amount, because too much of these things can even be toxic and too little doesn't do any good. And it has to be done consistently or not at all. So getting a miller to do that just right is a very, very hard task. So the behavior becomes get the local community miller to put exactly the right amount of fortification powder in every bag of maize that they grind. Absolutely has to be specific. And as you learn more about fortification, the more you can tune that specific behavior.
If you've done this right, you've got one sentence that defines who has to do what differently, and you've done it as specifically as possible. So for the Indian clean cook stove, who needs to do what differently? Mothers in rural households need to use clean cook stoves exclusively.
But you're constantly, on the one hand, researching the subject to understand more and trying your behavior change intervention and iterating on that. And those two streams come together to continually improve. For the purposes of designing for impact, you're focused mainly on them and not you. And most importantly, it's about action. It's not about attitudes or knowledge. It's about what people do with those things.